Ghearailt. We've got a very special thread for you today. Now, you've probably clicked on this video expecting vulgarities, body parts and bodily excretions, but I'm sorry to say you won't be disappointed. But these two curses are maledictions from a now extinct dialect in South East County Laois, or Queen's County. I'll talk to you another time about the naming of that county. Now, malediction comes from the Latin maledictio, and the word maledictio means a bad saying. And actually, this is where we get the Irish mheallta, and the opposite of malediction is a benediction, benedictio, where we get the Irish beannacht, which appears in this poem. So I'll put the readings of these poems in the description box, and you can skip ahead if you don't want to listen to the history of these poems. But do send on this video, please, and like and subscribe and all that rubbish, to anyone you know in County Laois, because this is an important part of Laois history, culture. Now, I'll say a little bit first about the dialect of County Laois, or Queen's County. Nowadays it's in the province of Leinster, which is an awful mongrel of a province. Leinster is made up of three historical kingdoms: the Kingdom of Ossory, the Kingdom of Meath, and the Kingdom of Line. And also, well, County Louth. Well, parts of County Louth were in the Kingdom of Meath, but County Louth was historically part of Ulster, which explains why Louth Irish is an Ulster dialect. Give it back. Now, this part of County Laois, or Queen's County, was outside the Kingdom of Ossory, but it displays an awful lot of features of Ossory Irish. Now, where was Ossory? Ossory was practically all the kingdom of modern County Kilkenny, excluding the two baronies, Beidh and Rhone, in East County Kilkenny, and a tiny little bit near the Tipperary border. I'll put links in the description box. But also the three western baronies of County Laois, Queen's County, I'm going to keep on saying it, were part of Upper Ossory. And what's interesting is that when the Ordnance Survey was being conducted in the 1830s, was it Pádraig Ó Caomh met some of the last native speakers in Ahabo, and he noted that the speakers in Ahabo spoke an almost identical dialect to the Irish speakers in County Kilkenny, noting that their slender r's were pronounced as zh, that they dropped off bh and from the end of words. So Gaarav was pronounced as Gara, and also that their B shave or BH and M shave or MH were W at the start of words, as opposed to W in other dialects. Now, there are audio recordings of Kilkenny Irish and Tipperary Irish. Well, Tipperary was of course a Munster dialect, but of all surviving dialects, Waterford Irish would be the most similar, but there's enough information about Kilkenny Irish for people interested in reviving Irish dialects to learn it. So that's a little bit about where Laois Irish stands. So the western baronies were in Upper Ossory, more or less identical to Kilkenny Irish, whereas this part was outside Ossory, but it does seem to share an awful lot of features or to be more or less identical with Ossory Irish. Sorry, there's another poem after coming into my head from this area as well. You've inspired me. And I might as well mention it actually, because it's related to the history of these poems. So these poems were recorded in a manuscript written by two of the last native speakers in County Laois, so in an area Fallowbeg or Luggacurre or Luggacurre. And I'll speak about the pronunciation of those place names maybe later or in another video. But when the Ordnance Survey was being conducted, Sean O'Donovan, or John O'Donovan, one of Ireland's greatest scholars and himself a native speaker of Ossory Irish, met Mheallta O'Brien on Christmas Day in the morning. And he was very, very impressed with his knowledge. He met him it was at 1838, and Mheallta O'Brien died later that year, just before the famine. But what was my whole point? Oh yeah, so but anyway, so this area, Fallowbeg, Luggacurre. So one of the poem that I didn't write up on the board was written by a local poet after an incident in the area. Was it the Earl of Kildare, who was of English extraction, murdered one of the Irish leaders in the area, O'Calla. O'Calla was invited to the castle after his to the castle of the Earl of Kildare after O'Calla's wife and child were found dead after a feast at which the Earl of Kildare was at. At which? I can't remember if he started the sentence with the preposition or not. But Gerald O'Brien, I should mention as well, perhaps I didn't, that Gerald O'Brien was the father of Mheallta O'Brien. So that these two last native speakers, or some of the last. But anyway, I digress from my digression. That Gerald O'Brien suggests that it was perhaps the Earl of Kildare poisoned the wife and the child of O'Calla. But anyway, when O'Calla went to the castle of the Earl of Kildare, he was brought up to admire the view at the top of the castle, but he was ambushed by the Earl of Kildare's men. And a local poet wrote, "Na déan comann, Gallda, má ghnír ní feirrde dhuit. Beidh choidhche tíad mheallta, ag sin comann an Gallda." So don't make friends with an Englishman. If you do, you won't be in the better of it. He will forever be about to deceive you. There you have the friendship of an Englishman. But of course, we're all great friends nowadays. So all these little poems, can I ask you to send this video to anyone you know in County Laois? It'd be nice. Actually, I think there was a keep up, lads, keep up. But there was some historian noted that verse that I just mentioned was taught by nurses to lisping children. But this is all culture. So then on to this poem. The Earl of Kildare, a man called, what was his name? Ghearailt. Ghearailt, was that in English? Gerald Fitzgerald, had an illegitimate son. And that man had a son who was also called Ghearailt. And this Ghearailt was known for being extraordinarily cruel. And there's a story, for example, and I'll put a link in the description box, you can read it in Gerald O'Brien's words, that he wanted to build a road, but there was an old woman's cottage in the way. And he said, "Is feirrde gomór bóthar ná behind?" I'd much prefer, I greatly prefer a road to old cottages. And he put a chain around her cottage and, knocked her to the ground. But there's another story then where this poem derives from, that this Gerald's cattle, I think, had trespassed onto someone else's land, another English gentleman's land, and they were trying to settle the dispute. And they agreed that the next person that would come the way would settle the dispute between them about whether the cattle were trespassing or not. But Gerald knew that the man coming the road was his own cowherd, and presumed that his own cowherd would, we'll say, vouch for Gerald. But he didn't. He decided in the favour of the other man. And Gerald was so angry that he took this man and his son to his castle to be hanged. And when this cowherd's wife heard that her husband and her son were about to be hanged, she ran there and she begged for their lives. And Gerald said, well, what have you to offer me? And she said, well, I only have 12 cows and a bull. And he said, it'll do. So she ran home, delighted that she was about to get her husband and son back, save their lives. And when she came back with the cattle, she saw her husband and her son had already been hanged. And this Gerald said, I'll allow you to take the corpses, but you'll have to give me the 12 cows and the bull, even though it is hardly enough. So this Gerald wasn't a particularly nice man. So this woman afterwards put a curse on Gerald, and if the story is true, the curse later came true. So I'll read it out almost 12 minutes into the video. And then we'll move on to we'll discuss features afterwards. Actually, as I'm on it, I might as well talk about the history of this poem. This is just about some murderous man who used to wait at a place called Huzzy's Cross near Ballinakil in County Laois. And one day he picked the wrong man. He invited in some man whose brother he had already killed. And when they were walking along towards the castle, there was a place, Dialect, which may have been Dialect in the area. But this Thom Táith would never allow anyone to walk behind him. So as Thom Táith was walking behind and this other man was walking ahead, as they were going over the Now what an is a ford. And a ford, of course, is a river crossing, but in a ford you get your feet wet, whereas in a bridge you go over the water, whereas in an you go through the water. As in Laoighis, Dublin. But as they were going over the and Thom Táith was distracted, this man turned around and slit him from his stomach all the way up to the top of his chest, and his intestines fell out into the river. Well, he took out his testicles and shoved them into his mouth. This is why every school student should learn these poems. So, right, and one more. What's the word I'm looking for? Warning that, of course, I'm no expert on the intonation of speech in southeast County Laois or Queen's County, but I do have a good idea of what the individual phones or speech sounds would have been like. But as regards intonation, I tell you, you could learn more from an old country person that never went to school and doesn't know a word of Irish. Their intonation is less anglicised than I'd say, well, practically any primary or secondary school teacher with degrees coming out their posterior orifice. So go out and listen to the old people, the old country people. Right, okay, that's enough talking for now. So now I'll talk about these, or I'll read them out. Ghearailt jaar an ghaire gonta, fásach go táiseach de gheta. Drisheog agus a dá cheann is an talún, lo chúithne ruachtar de halle, nead an ceoig a bóla gheta, agus cach na ngawr in áit de leapan. Mar de bhuan tú dhím an mac san taithid, bhuan tú dhím an dábh ó dhéag san tara, agus éireacht na raid da rí sé Ghearailt. A Thom Táith chuirim lomchra Ghearailt, de bhéir fan na cearc agus na géham. De bherim me vannacht an chéring, de bhuan de chuideas log de bléine, agus de bhúil amach fecht de bhéile. Beautiful. Right, so let's now dive in to discussing some dialectal features of these poems in mouth-watering or mind-numbing detail, whichever you prefer. And I encourage, we'll say if you're from this area, Fallowbeg, Luggacurre, Fallowbeg. Actually, I'm going to say a quick word about those. Whenever you see OW in place names, in Irish place names, that normally was intended to represent the sound O, but of course OW has come to be pronounced O in standard English. So now this reading pronunciation has replaced the O pronunciation. So I'm sure there are people nowadays in that area that say Fallowbeg, but Fallowbeg was the pronunciation intended. In the same way that Mallow in County Cork, the Irish for that is Mala. People think that it means the slope of the swan. It doesn't. It was Mar Nalla in Old Irish, the rock or the plain of rock. And over time that became reduced to Mala. So then to show the O sound in English, that was represented with OW, but nowadays people read that OW as O. Shame on you. Right, okay, diving in to Fallowbeg. Oh, sorry, my whole point. I would encourage you to forget everything you ever learnt about school Irish, and try to pick up. You know that this is local history. It's our culture. Right, off we go. Finally. First thing, I'll translate them first. O short Gerald of the terse or stabbing or pungent laugh, a wasteland or desert to the threshold of your gate, a bramble and its two heads or its two ends in the earth or in your land, a verdant or green lake on top of your hall or mansion, a nest or the nest of the hawk in the hole of the smoke, your chimney, and shit of the goats in place of your bed, because you took from me the son and the father. You took from me the 2 cows of 10, the 12 cows, and the bull, and an inheritance may your inheritors or heirs not receive, O Gerald. And as I'm on it, I might as well translate this one as well. So, O Thom Táith, I put a sharp bare torment on you. You would take the hens and the geese from me. I bear or I give my blessing to the group of foot soldiers, or sometimes it was used to refer to just one, but mostly group. So, so to the soldiers who extracted your testicles, out of the hollow of your groin and slapped it out along your mouth. Beautiful stuff. Right, off we go. So, I should mention as well, sorry, I've written this in the Gaelic script. I'm sure you've been wondering for the last 20 minutes, what's that in the board? Yeah, beautiful Gaelic script. Learn a bit more about Irish culture. Of course, the dotted consonants, the dot was done away with, God help us. So the dotted consonant nowadays would be written as that consonant without the dot, but followed by a H. An unetymological H. Anyway, so learners tend to say "a" because, of course, that's the way that letter is pronounced in English. But I'm on there now. Let's stupid computers. I want to keep plowing ahead now with this. There we go. But this is a schwa, so a centralized vowel. Oh, so Ghearailt. Now notice that this vocative particle, whenever you're addressing someone, you always have and chevu. Learners tend to leave it out because, of course, there's no vocative particle or case in English. So this is why we have, when addressing these two people, a Ghearailt and a home. Now, historically, masculine names were slenderized at the end. So Gerald, we'll say with a broad LT, became ilt. But what's interesting is that we have slenderization or palatalization in this poem, but not in this one. It remains home. It doesn't become a heme or anything like that. Is there anything else interesting to talk about there? There's not really, except that LT in Munster dialects, say from the absolute extreme of Corcovine, LT has become LH in Munster dialects. But I suspect that perhaps not in this area. So the LT remained as LT. Of course, now one suggestion is that LT became LTH or LT shave, and as you now know from watching my other videos, TH in English, of course, it's interdental, but I suggest that it was probably alveolar in Irish. Well, this TH became a H sound in around 1300. So this LH pronunciation might be very, very old. Anyway, now here, another interesting thing. This double R, and of course, historically, Irish had long consonants. So the strong consonants that weren't chevued, that weren't lenited, would have been long, and were written double in the case of LL, well, NN, well, okay, I won't get into that. But basically, this, now it looks like gheirr, but this strong R, the slender strong R, which theoretically would have been this palatalized trill, like they have in Czech, would have first of all become broad. So that would have been gheirr, right, along r. But the next thing, this e vowel, and remember this I is just a quality indicator to show that the following consonant is slender, it's not actually there. So this e sound then, in most dialects, and we'll come back and talk about this in a while, became a, and this a then before, so we would have had ghearr, so short vowel but a long consonant. But what happened then is that the length went from the consonant to the vowel. So ghearr became ghearr with a tapped R, ghearr. And some dialects went a step further and changed that a sound to a, which is suggested here in this poem, since yar rhymes with unreide, of the laugh. So so what that shows about the Irish in this area, Fallowbeg, Luggacurre, southeast County Laois, Queen's County, was probably that E or EA before R was A and not A, as it was in other dialects in East County Galway, for example. And notice Galway, not Galway, because it comes from the Irish Gaelic. Right, so that's that. Unreide. Now, if this were an Ossory dialect, we would expect the pronunciation ghnír. But if it were outside the Ossory dialect, we'd expect mheallta. Duro in County Laois, and is it Closhan or Clorhan, are the two furthest east points that I know of where this slender R was pronounced as zh, but it may have gone further east. And there's evidence, of course, even that it went up as far as Clonsast in County Offaly, and even sporadic instances of it in South County Dublin. But this also, this slender R becoming zh, is found in County Mayo as well, and you'll hear it as well from some speakers in West Kerry. So on the ghnír, runta, is there anything to talk about there? Runta does not. Fásach go táirseach. Again, there's some evidence to suggest that slender R before S, and notice the difference in the Gaelic script, the R has a line down out of it, excuse me, whereas the S is just up and around, so no line down. But anyway, there's some evidence to suggest that in Ossory, slender R before S disappeared, so that if this were an Ossory dialect, this would be pronounced táiseach, as opposed to táirseach, where the slender R becomes broad before slender S, and all other cardinal consonants, so D and TLS. Fásach go táirseach, dheata, nothing there. Now, here we come to this. Drisheog agus a dá cheann. In Munster Irish, of course, and in Ossory Irish, it would seem, certainly in South Kilkenny, well, it's quite a complicated word stress system. If the second vowel is long, in Munster, then the second syllable gets the stress. If the first two syllables are short but the third syllable is long, the third syllable gets the stress. If the first syllable is long and the third syllable is long, the more historical pronunciation is to keep the stress on the first syllable, as it was in Old Irish. But there are some younger speakers that move it to the third syllable. Now, the question is, in this area, did it have Munster-style stress, or did it have, we'll say, Old Irish stress, where the word stress was always on the first syllable, bar a couple of compound words, which should be written separately anyway. But anyway, right. And one argument for suggesting that this area had Old Irish stress or Old Gaelic stress, Old Gaelic, was because of this word. You'll notice, so all the way down along, fásach go táirseach, the dheata, driseo gus a dá cheann is a talún, lochú na ruachtar the halla, nead the teoc bóla dheata, the leapan, ahir, taraf, and that it seems perhaps just in the first verse that this is missing. And of course, that would be less evident, this or pronunciation, if the stress were on the oon, as it would be in Munster. So that's one argument to suggest that this was talún and drisheog, as opposed to drisheog and talún. So there you have it. Now, on we go to this. Now, o dá cheann. What? No, so a bramble is a feminine noun. All words that end in og in Irish are feminine, even though that most nouns that end in a broad consonant are masculine, but og is always feminine. Actually, if anyone's interested, it's borrowed, that og ending was historically borrowed from Welsh. I won't go off and talk about that, but it is very interesting. So AC, actually, I will go off and talk about that. The Celtic ending was arcos, right? Now you have different endings of it. Now in Irish, the K became ACH, but in Welsh the K became a G, and this long. So in Irish or in Gaelic, the A became short, whereas in Welsh it became like this rounded. Well, I'll do the IPA symbol. That's not a P. That's meant to be a rounded A. Og. So the native ending in Irish is the ACH, but the one borrowed from Welsh or Britannic or British might be a better term. It was borrowed from Britannic. Right, and we're back. Oh, sorry, you can't even see that, can you? There you go. Right. And I'm rambling away and you're not even able to see it. So, a dá ceann. So, the whole point. This is feminine. So, you say a bramble and her 2 heads, right? Now, in modern Irish, when you say his, you say o, and again, not a, as your teacher probably mispronounces it. But o. So, o agus séviú means his. O agus analu, which means hate before vowels, although in older grammars you'll see that analu, they use it to refer to séviú, which is unfortunate. So o and the softening of consonants means his. O agus analu, H before vowels, means hers, and o agus ru means their, as in THEIR. In most modern dialects, this possessive adjective, his, her, their, skips the numeral and goes straight onto the noun. So in modern, for example, would be a rá ceann would be his 2 heads. A rá ceann, without the séviú, without the H, would be her 2 heads, and a rá geann would be their 2 heads. But here we have the older usage where the o puts an alu. So what's an alu? An alu is H before vowels. This isn't a vowel, so the analu doesn't apply. So a dá and then dá, as we expect anyway, puts an ru. Also puts a séviú. So the punk, the old dot, nowadays written with an unetymological H. Now, so another question about the dialect in this area. In Leinster, it would seem that this word was pronounced as, and when I say Leinster, I mean the line, so Wexford, Wicklow, Carlow, South Dublin and Kildare, was pronounced as ceann, and possibly with the long N's surviving, as it does in Ulster and right down as far as South Roscommon. It was at Taffe, there were instances of it 7 miles east of Athlone. So it can. But in this area, it would seem that it was pronounced like in Munster, and as what's the word I'm thinking of? Oh, ceann. And the evidence we have for that is from this poem, where in the manuscript this is written OU, a home, tá, cuirim, loam, as opposed to hum and lum. So we can be sure that in this area, since it seems to show other Munster features, that it went with Munster as well. And in Kilkenny, of course. So, ceann. Now, this is very interesting. It's all very interesting, isn't it? In the. Now, right, where are we going to go with this? In Proto-Celtic, so the ancestor language of all the modern Celtic languages, the word for the was, can you see that? You can. Sindos. Now, what happened is that the ending was lost, right? So forget that. And that the S was lost but the S was preserved if the, okay, sorry, I'll just do it again. So ind, And in Old Irish that was spelt as ind, but eventually became to be spelt like modern un. But the S of the original article survived if the preceding preposition, as in, on, whatever, ended in a non-vowel. So basically, if it ended in a consonant. And of course, this I historically was in, but the N was lost. Sorry, that's an N. Can't really see it, can you? But later dialects reintroduced the N on analogy, inson, but ison is the historical form. And this survives, certainly in the plural, isna. Actually, I think in the video I put up about Halloween, the Halloween poem, there's an example where he says isna. So you can go have a look at that. But this poem maintains the older ison, and I presume this is what was used in the area as well. Right, now the next thing. In Munster, when we have preposition and the article, the, we put an aroo on the following, when we've a singular noun, we put an aroo on the singular noun, including T, whereas Connacht doesn't. So there is one source of this poem I came across, and it put D before this, so isun dalún. But, well, there are arguments for and against whether the D was there or not. In other places in the manuscript written by Gerald O'Brien, from which this poem was found, he does have instances of preposition, singular article, and D before T. Right, so that's that. So ison and isna without the N. And of course, I should mention, nowadays, this is of course where the word so comes from, in the. But so itself is just a reduction of ison, in the. And this, well, yeah, right, I won't talk anymore about it. Now, talún, as it probably was, rather than talún. Very interesting word. Talún is the dative case, or what other people would call the prepositional case, or maybe even the locative case would be a better word for it. Locative, of course, coming from the Latin locus, meaning place, where we get the word local, or to locate. So, because this is located in the earth, we use the locative case. And what that, or the dative case as it's called traditionally in official Tábhacht. So nowadays, this word, if I got rid of the dot, of course, would be Talmhain. But the nominative case of that, so they will say the root form, is Talamh, Talmh. Now, some people would throw that into the fourth declension of nouns, or say that it's an irregular noun. In the Caidan Figul, it has been turned into an irregular noun, but it's not an irregular noun. It's what's called an N stem, meaning that we add on N to form the genitive. Now, watch this. So the word Talamh, which in this part of the country was pronounced Tala, and it would seem that in all of Leinster, as I mentioned before, that B-shave, so like BH, MH, sorry, I write it with H, BH, MH, DH, and GH were all dropped off at the end of words in Leinster, and in parts of South Connacht as well. So this word was probably pronounced Tala in the area, Tala, as opposed to Talamh in Munster. Now, forming the genitive of this word, we add on an. There was a rule in Old Irish that a word lost every second non-final syllable. So there would have been another syllable there for though long ago, but we lose every second syllable. So that means that we lose the A. which leaves us with talvun, right, as it was pronounced, talvun. That v came to be pronounced as w, and eventually became talwun, or talun. Now, the locative case, or the dative case, whatever you want to call it, is often, for instance, the slenderized form of the genitive, and that became Talmhain with the slender in. And this is where we get the modern spelling of talún. But of course, that's a completely irregular noun, because how are you to know that talav becomes talún? Or well, this is the locative form of it. Whereas this follows rules. We add on our stem, knock off every second non-final syllable. There we have it. That's what irregular means, of course. Nowadays, colloquially, regular is used to mean often. I go there regularly. But what regular means, regula in Latin means rule. So you go there, say I go there regularly, means you go there always at a certain time as a rule. So when there are irregular sound changes, it means that they follow rules. And of course, rules are easy to learn. There's a pattern. So that's talav. And the whole idea in this area anyway is that it was probably talún with stress on the first syllable. Right, how are we doing for time? Oh, Jesus. Loch óhine ochther da halle. Nothing too special there, it would seem, at ochther. Again, no, okay, the preposition, what's written are, but of course in all dialects, the underlying form is ed. Sorry, that J is too big. Ed. And a better spelling of that would be O-I-R, because this preposition ed is actually a conflation of a number of prepositions in old Gaelic from fhir, where the F was lost over time, but the R became slenderized. So the way to show that the R became slenderized in Irish spelling is to put in this silent I before it. And that's why, of course, we have orm, ort, but then all of a sudden in modern Irish we have this anomalous AIR, which we would expect to be pronounced ar, which no dialect has ever pronounced it as. Whereas if we spelt it as it would first of all adhere to the older spelling, and it would be regularly pronounced. Right. But of course, people write it as AR, unfortunately. So this ed, the R in slender or in ossery, again we would expect it to be ej, where the slender R became j. So if this were in ossery, it would be ej uachter, but I suspect it was outside of ossery, so it was probably ed uachter, the halle. Again, the question of the LL being long or not. I suspect in this area that it wasn't, that they were confused, or that the length distinction had been lost. I'll put a link in the description box. There's a recording of, for example, well, like all the East Ulster dialects, so basically from Derry all the way eastwards, and even in Inishowen, I think, in Donegal, and you'll hear it in Donegal as well, that the length was maintained in all strong consonants. So basically, R, L, L, N, N, and any consonant that didn't have a H after it, basically. One of the Derry speakers, she says, was it ein gan ghléithe with the long T, ghléithe, is hicher vor na cregge, cregge with the long G. So long consonants like Italian and Finnish and Estonian have, Hungarian, all these different languages. Anyway, sorry, I digress. No, wait till we come to this word, nab, nest, very interesting word. one feature of Eastern Irish, basically, so from, we'll say, Kilkenny all the way up to, well, Ulster, excluding Donegal. Donegal actually was kind of the, nowadays people say Ulster Irish when they mean Donegal Irish, but Donegal actually was slightly different from all the other dialects of Ulster. But one feature of Eastern Irish, basically, so of Leinster and East Ulster, was that E, Old Irish E, which nowadays, before the broad consonant, has this dummy vowel A, was preserved as the sound E. Right, E. Before D and D shave, G and G shave, and S. Now, sorry, I should qualify that. In Ossory, and it would seem presumably Leinster proper, so I mean Wexford, Wicklow, Carlow, that this was pronounced before these consonants, so D, D shave, G, G shave. Whereas in Ulster, East Ulster, this was pronounced as and not a. Other dialects changed this to an a sound, as in man. Sorry, that's like this. Before S as well. So the word for example, there's, I'll put an article in the description box, from Ember in Wexford, and the name, what I would say, Pather. Pather, they pronounced Pether, with the Old Irish surviving. So the question is, or for example in County Kilkenny, the word for small was not big, but beg, because of course that's the way it was in Old Irish. Now it was spelt as a C, but the C really represented a long G, which is the way I would suggest it to be spelt, but I'll talk about my own spelling recommendations another time. Beg. And this is the way it's pronounced in Waterford as well. Other dialects, of course, say, can you still see that again? Say, no, that's the way it's spelt in the Caida on the Figule that's taught in schools. But of course, that's the spelling beg. Whereas it should be spelt as beg for those that pronounce it that way. Beg. But and even the area that this poem is from, Fallowbeg in English, but in this area the word for small was preserved as beg. So you can take that as a Leinster feature or an East of Ireland feature. So the word for feir, for example, one of the last native speakers, he didn't pronounce it in Kilkenny, Pádraig Poir, he didn't pronounce it agala, but Egula. Although in South Kilkenny it seems to have been, they seem to have both, but that's what we might expect as we move further and further away from Munster and we transition into Leinster and Ulster dialects, or Meath dialects. Kingdom of Meath, I mean. Right, so if you're from Leinster, you can now stop saying beg and start saying beg. Right, where are we? Oh, nad. All right, of course. So the question is, was this word pronounced as ned or nad? Well, the whole point, there's the discussion. Possibly it was a in this area to rhyme with the a in Gallda, because of course this is a T, where Old Irish would have become a, like it did in other dialects in all instances. Right, what else? Sorry, I have to talk about the etymology of the word nest. Which is very interesting. So, again, so this NEAD in modern Irish, remember, this A is just a dummy vowel or a quality indicator, so it's not really there. Really, it's that E before broad consonants became A in most dialects, as I was just talking about. So in Old Irish, of course, there was the dummy vowel wasn't there, and was spelt as NET usually, but that NET really represents NEDD. So this long D, ned, double D. But so Old Irish or Old Gaelic, Ghearailt, double cons or double D. One of the sources of it is that it goes back to older NEZD, or arguably NEEVD. Now, this ZD goes back to Proto-Indo-European nistos. Now, in Proto-Indo-European, when that's written, the accent refers to stress, not to a long vowel like it does in Irish. So, nistos. But what's very interesting here is of course, this is where we get the English word nest from as well. Where the D, according to Grimm's law, has become a T, and it's also where we get the Latin nidus. But what's interesting is what it's made up of, this word. Sorry, no, this has nothing to do with dialects, but the ni part refers to down or low, as in the Netherlands or the nether region of somewhere. Ni meaning down, and this SD is the zero grade, or basically the vowelless version of like the word seat in English, or like the word sit, or to set something. And it's also where we get the Irish word. Now, the older spelling, of course, was suid, SUID, punk E, but of course that was dumbed down in the Caidan of Figiúil, even though that Ulster dialects still preserve this I as a y sound. So suy, it's still a two-syllable word. And the dialects of East Ulster also maintained this suy sound. But you can see, my whole point anyway is that you can see the S and the D from this st. So that's the etymology of the word nyad. Sorry, we're back from that now. Next thing, nyad a teoch a bowl. Now, again, the rhyming system of this poem, yar or fásach táirseach, don't know what's going on here. Possibly it's that every third line the rhyming system breaks down. But loch uachne uachtar de halle, nyad a teoch a bowl a jatha. That it follows the Munster and the Ossory style diphthongization, where before, I should explain this to people that don't know it, when we have so RR, LL, NN, and M, which should be written double but is nowadays written singularly, and NG, when we have a vowel before those consonants, in Munster, they become diphthongized, although it becomes lengthened before the R. That's kind of in a separate thing by itself. So, for example, in Munster, POLL has become pole. We put in this O, and that's shown as well that this happened in Fallowbeg, in this part of County Laois, Queen's County. Pole. Whereas in Leinster, line, it remained as pull. There's a place in South Dublin near Chapel Izard, Pull B, or Pull B, the yellow hole, but pull, as opposed to pole. And of course, pull was the pronunciation in Old Irish with a long L, pull, pull. But anyway, my whole point is that in this area, we know that it was pole because of the rhyming system. Niad on toig a bowl, o. Gatha. Now, one feature of Leinster Irish, as I mentioned, is that I, G, H, or so BH, MH, DH, GH, all dropped off at the end of words. And one So we know that this was Ghearailt, and actually one source of this poem gives CH, which would have been a slender CH, which would have been pronounced silently anyway. Agus cock shit of the goats. Now, so I said that all the stressed syllables in this poem rhyme. A Gerald jar an gheirr runta fásach go táiseach de Ghearailt. Here, it seems that there's no rhyming system. If there is, I can't work it out. Although I'm thinking now, actually, it's only occurring to me. Drishog agus a dá chean it's a talon. I doubt it. Drishog agus a dá chean it's a talon. The a, but I don't think so, because we've already shown that we have the o. But anyway, but it's probably that the rhyming system breaks down in every third line. Drishog agus a dá chean it's a talon. Agus cock na ngawr in the lappen. Now, there is a tiny bit of evidence to suggest that in Leinster, ABHA was A, that the consonant disappeared but lengthened the previous vowel, or the preceding vowel. So this goat was pronounced not as gaur, as it would be in Munster, or ghearr, as it would have been in the Kingdom of Meath, so Northern Dublin, County Meath, Westmeath, where things started to get complicated. We just don't know. Now, coming on to this word, and I should say, not. Nowadays, School Irish, the Caid the Figule, writes that as in ought, but that leads people to say it in ought, and they separate the preposition from the noun. But this is the older spelling, where puts an oru, of course. They've turned this into an exception. Not, where in not, the n is attached to the noun, in not. And I should say that it would seem, that learners nowadays would pronounce this as och, as if it were, we'll say like in English, ch, ch sound, this affricate sound. That was a recent development in the dialects that have it, and there are still speakers in Donegal, for example, that haven't picked it up yet. And it seems that there are no basically my whole point is that slender T in Leinster, again, line, or in the Kingdom of Meath, wasn't pronounced as ch, but rather as a palatal och, where the so any pure palatal consonant means that the tongue is touching the lower teeth, and that it's the middle of the tongue that does the pronouncing, raised to the hard palate. So this would in Leinster line have been pronounced och. And we'll say the last speaker of Kilkenny Irish, Pádraig Feirrde, it was remarked upon that his consonants, his slender T, slender D, all those were very, very palatal, pure palatal, och. So the yapon. Now, here we come to another very interesting word again. This is taking ages. Jesus, I'm a great man for the long videos. Do, of course, puts a chevu. The current spelling system of Irish, and really all the way back into old Gaelic, can't really show the lenition of R, L, and N. But there are dialects that maintain it. Probably not this dialect, but there would be a difference for some dialects, for example, between, we'll say, his bed with chevu, agus chevu. So, I'll give you the Ulster pronunciation. We'll say alyobui with the l, so the palatal alveolar l, alyobui. Whereas her bed, agus an alu, which means that the L remains strong, would be alyobui. But this dialect didn't have lenited R, L, and N. I suspect that Leinster dialects didn't have it either. but I may change my mind. Now, this word. Of course, everyone in school learns, actually leave that there, learns that the word for bed is, and people pronounce it laba, laba. But the historical spelling of that is with an IDH at the end. Now, what happens is that IDH in Munster is pronounced as ig. In Ulster, it's pronounced as e, so labui, and in Northern Connacht as well, so in Mayo, and North Roscommon, all that area. Whereas in South Galway, and in Leinster, and the Ossory as well, that this gets knocked off, so labba. But had they left, had the Caidán na Figiúil left, or the people that designed it, I should say, left the IDH, then every dialect could regularly, following rules, following a pattern, derive their pronunciation. Now, so here we go again. Labwig. Most disyllabic words, so words with two syllables that end in an IDH, go back to an older Leabith. Now, so in Old Irish, well, it would have been Leabwith, or Old Gaelic. Now, in the Tishil Ghearailt, like the word Talamh, it's an N stem. So to form the genitive, we add on EAN. And again, we knock off every second non-final syllable. So here we have this it, so that disappears. Now we have a broad B next to a slender TH, so the slender TH became broad to assimilate to the preceding B. And then this sound by about 1300 had become h. And because h is an unvoiced sound, it unvoiced the voiced B to P, and that's why the Caidán na Figiúil spells it as P, but they turn what is a regular noun into an irregular noun. They leave it alone. It's, as I said, it's easy to learn rules. Labwig, lapum. That's all. All you need to know is that that is an N stem, and from there you can regularly. Oh, sorry, I can't even see the end of it. And from there you can regularly derive the Tishil Ghearailt of it. Right. So that's lapun. You know it, the lapun. Right, on we go. Jesus, as I thought I was going to get through this much sooner than I am. But anyway, we'll ramble on. It isn't often I find myself in front of a computer. Mar, because a lot of teachers mispronounced it as mar or mar, or yeah. There's no father there, so there's no a. It's a. So mar with the tapped or mar. Mar. Now this particle do. This is a particle that is used before verbs historically in the aimsir choidhche, so the past tense. On aimsir choidhche, the habitual past tense, and the more cnílach, the conditional mood. It survives. Ulster and Connacht Irish have lost it, but it survives in Munster Irish, although it's starting to disappear. Although it's still alive and well in Cape Clear, along Cléide, for as much as Irish is alive and well along Cléide, which is a very interesting dialect. But this do. So for example, the word be, to be, in the past tense, of course, how would you say he was in Irish? Most people in school will say Visha. Sorry, again, you can't see that. Visha. But of course, the historical form is do Visha. And this is what this do is. It's this do that puts the shevu in the first place. So even when the do disappears in Connacht and Ulster dialects, its effect remains. But here we have the do and its effect, the wooing. Now, this word is very interesting. Booing. Nowadays, well, that would be the word bang. But this is actually a conflation of two words in old Gaelic. There was the word Bennett, which, well, okay, Old Irish didn't use the punk over the D, but I will. So Bennett and Boinyas, so this means to strike and this means to break. And this id ending, if you're interested to know, is related to the eth ending, as in saith, quoteth, in English, Shakespearean English. They're cognates. But basically, these two, the words became conflated into the word bain. Now, one thing, bain, of course, bain was what was said in, well, it's what is said in Galway. It's said in Waterford, and it was said in Ossory, in Kilkenny, when Irish was alive and well there. But of course, in Cork and Kerry, we say buin. Buin. And we should spell it, if you say buin, write buin. But the verbal noun of buinnes, breaking, was booing. And then booing, what you often find that, so for those of you who have no experience of Old Irish or Old Gaelic, the verbal system is incredibly difficult. But as time went on, the verbal nouns, the ing words, came to be seen as the root of the words. And this is where this form, extract, came from the buinnes of Old Irish. Now, booing. Now, in Munster, well, for example, you extracted in Munster would be the, or in Munster and Kerry at least, the Winish. And again, note that I'm spelling it with the U because that's how it's pronounced. The Winish. But here we have the Vuin to, where we don't have the ending, but we have the separate pronoun instead. So, which we might expect from this area, since the mheallta is best preserved in Munster, where the information for the person and the tense or the mood are all part of the same morpheme or part of the word. So you took from me. Now, this is interesting. In all the surviving dialects of in all the surviving dialects of Irish, the prepositions of do, which means for, and de, which means away from, have been confused, and people will say do for both. But Sean O'Donovan, or John O'Donovan, as I said, a scholar from Kilkenny and a native speaker himself, said that in Kilkenny, do and ge were kept separate. So I presume that in Leinster they were also kept separate, and I suggest that they should be kept separate in the standard language, which they happen to be in the Caidán na Figiúil. One good thing. But here we have the vuin to yim. Now notice that we find that say dum and deem, whatever, tend to be lenited or softened when the preceding word ends with a vowel. So this is why in Munster and Connacht we say ghearailt with a r. Even though that you'll see it spelt as that without the shevu. Giadich. Dialectal. Now, mock, nothing interesting there, is on Táith. Now, this word, it's spelt as that, but it's rather than being pronounced with this vowel in the International Phonetic Alphabet, rather than being pronounced as a and saying ahid, it's pronounced as ahid. But the Tishel Ginneduch is, so of a father is ahar with an a, but this is with an a, and should be spelt ahid. Oops, you can't see that picture. Can you see that? Ahid. Right. Now, one very interesting feature, it seems, of Leinster Irish was that TH between vowels disappeared. So this is why we'll say the Irish for Carlo, or more historically, Carla, like the old lads say, Carla, disappeared. So there's one historical source that writes the name Carlo as Catherloch in English, Catherloch, or probably at the time it was Catherloch when English did have Catherloch. But then eventually this sound, or the sound, disappeared and became Carloch, Carloch. So the number 4 in Carlo, and presumably all of Leinster, was a car, a car. So the word father may have been pronounced ar, mar. And there's a recording of one of the last native speakers in County Louth, and he says, my father. He says, mahod, mahod. Now he says mo with an alu rather than it forming together, but the whole point is that the ahar he pronounces as aud. So the question is, was this pronounced as aud or ahar? I suspect if it were a true Leinster line dialect, it would, and this happens in East Ulster as well, actually, I should say, but in this area in Fallowbeg, it was probably pronounced, or Luggacurre, it was probably pronounced as the Munster style, Ossory style, Untitled. On we go, again we have vuanto, and again notice that we have this B shevu pronounced as v, whereas other dialects in Connacht would have pronounced it as w, but in Leinster, line, it would have survived as v, bilabial fricative rather than a bilabial approximant. W. So vuin to yim on da vo yegus santara. Again, da vo rather than on da wo. Notice that this word ends in a vowel, so puts a shevu on the word after it. EA in Munster and Ossory became ia. I'll write that in the board. So the historical sound of A became half long ia in Munster when after a slender consonant and before a broad vowel, which means, now notice that, or if we have a word that has let's say rail, whatever, a rail, a bit of money. Remember that or at the start of a word, historically this would have been a strong, slender or, rail, but has disappeared in every single dialect of Gaelic in Ireland, the Isle of Man and Scotland. So first became strong or, rail, but then of course the strong broad or, this E was now no longer between. So this was broad and this was broad, whereas the rule is that A became ia in Munster and Ossory only when between a slender and broad vowel. So we'd say bia, for example. Let's mixing up things now with the IPA. Bial in Munster and Ossory, and in County Laois, of course, this part of County Laois. But in poetry, the older pronunciation and poetry and prayers and things, the pronunciation of A is maintained. Whereas in spoken language, I presume that this would have been said ondavo yiag, rather than ondavo yeog. Okay, Sontara and the bull, again this feature of B shave being dropped off at the end of a consonant, the word for bull, and you'll notice of course that this word is related to Latin taurus, and historically actually the English word steer, as in a stag thing. And when they were conducting the ordnance survey, I don't know how I said it, when you're a teacher you tend to repeat yourself. One tends to repeat oneself. But when they were in Ahabo, he recorded that the native speakers pronounced Garav, rough, as Gara, so Tarav would have been Tara. Agus Eirecht mar I Darisha. Perhaps this shows that I, and I again, were all pronounced as I. Eirecht nor I dairische. One thing, this verb here, agha. Now I'm going to make a separate video about this because it's complicated. But in Munster, this would be I or I, whereas in Connacht, this. So, for example, the word get. How to say he gets? Most people nowadays would say. Oh, sorry, they'd say feirrde, even though that the historical form is yain. That's what I said, and you'll still hear that from people as well. From yain, for yainche. But the historical form of this fein is actually faghann, and this would suit every single dialect because this agh became a in Connacht, as I say, fáinche, and it became well, kind of an o in East Ulster, fóinche. So the Caidan the Figul form is, again, as you might expect from the Caidan the Figul, wrong. Anyway, that's that. I would have finished with that one. We'll shut up down a while. This ending is the old accusative plural, but the accusative case was lost in Irish and tended to be confused, which is why a plural in Irish can have many different forms. But this was pronounced E. So dairische. Well, again, that's the question. I may have read it out the first time actually. Dairische. But if it didn't follow Munster style stress, then this line would have been agus airecht nor I dairische. Agus airecht nor I dairische, which would actually make more sense, since we'd again be maintaining the stress I. A Ghearailt, and we're back. Okay, so that's that one. This one is a bit shorter. We've spoken about it. A home. So again, as I mentioned, and as I think I just rubbed out, the R, L, N, N, M, which should be written as a double M, but isn't anymore, and NG. When these letters are at the end of a syllable, so basically not followed by a vowel, and R being a slightly different case, the O becomes diphthongized in Munster and Ossory, and obviously in this part of County Laois as well. So a home, as it was in the manuscript OU, a home tá, cuidim loam chrá, and the same with that here we have pole rhyming with shouk. Is there any other example of that there? There's not. Right. The next thing. Well, the manuscript didn't have the TH in South Leinster, so in Wexford, and in Kilkenny, in Waterford, Tipperary, East Limerick, so if you're from Limerick City, listen to this, and East Clare, TH, when at the broad TH, when at the end of a syllable became CH. So we'd expect this to be pronounced Táich, but the name was possibly with an I. Tá. Oh, sorry, I can't even see it. Tá. Well, that wasn't pronounced anyway. Okay, because it was slender. Cuidim, again, if it was Ossory, we'd expect cuijim. But if it weren't Ossory, we'd expect cuidim. Laum chrá. Nowadays, this word has been mangled into CR father. I'll come back and talk about that another time. This AUSADH ending in East Ulster and Meath and North Dublin would have been U. Crow. Gheirr, same story. In poetry, gheirr, but in spoken language, ghearr. O. No, this seems to have been a feature of Ossory Irish, but also appears the odd time in Mayo Irish, if I'm not mistaken. That O, before broad consonants, is actually pronounced as e, or more as a centralized that vowel. So, for example, one of the last native speakers, perhaps the last Pádraig Poir from Kilkenny, has the line, open the door, which most people might say, well, Oscail an Doras. Well, Oscail a Doras, I'd say, Oscail a Doras. But he said, Escail a Deras, with an E, Escail a Deras. And this was possibly then as well. So cuidim lom chrá gheirr earth. The verfa you would bear, there's an old punct there, it's gone a bit faded. Again, the verfa, that F shouldn't really be there historically because this was in the future, don't worry about it. Na cearcha, nothing special there. Agus na géwan. Now, in Connacht, well, the plural of that, géana, in Connacht they say géhwi, and in Donegal I think they say géhe with a TH. But here we have this plural form, which is more historical, rather than géama as it would be nowadays. Which again is a misspelling because we'd expect, really, if we were to represent the Munster pronunciation, we'd have to spell it with a slender DHE, or else that would become ia. So, for example, I might as well mention it as I'm rambling away. The word nowadays for reading, as is taught in schools, is well, like that. What that would mean that the Munster person says liav, but the Munster person doesn't say liav. The Munster person says, or the native Irish speaker says leiv, although there are some dialects that drop off the MH and say the lay, but that's because the preceding form had this, and of course in Munster this y sound disappears. We don't say leiv, we just say leiv. Now that goes back to an older form where the ending was broad anyway, but well, we won't get into that. The very vanacht. No, so in Munster, stress is put on ACH if in the second syllable. So if you have ACH in the second syllable, it's stressed if all the other syllables in the word are short, except in abstract nouns. So this in Munster would be banacht, but that seems to have started to break down in Kilkenny and Laois, so I presume that this was banacht, vanacht. This is a very interesting word. All right, and I should try to wrap this up now because it's getting a bit long. Only now is it getting a bit long. So one, as I mentioned back here with the word ahead, that T between vowels in Leinster seems to have disappeared, causing the preceding vowel to become long. And there's plenty of evidence for this in place names and words that survive in English from Irish. So this word for band of foot soldiers. Cairn. Now, caring. So the first step. Here we have slender or N. Now, as we know, or becomes strong when before dentals. So DNTLS. So DNTLS. So this is a strong slender or. We know that the strong slender or, the r, became strong broad or in all dialects. So now we're dealing with broad or, but slender strong in. Right? So this was broken up then, this broad or and slender strong in. Now, well, what will I do it? So E and then I-N, let's write it like that. No, is that legible? Just about. No, so Ghearailt. And what seems to have been a feature of Leinster Irish was that slender NN, so INN, became slender NG. And for example, this went up as far as South Dublin at least. One of the Dublin mountains is it Barnashlingan or Barnashlingen in English, I think, but that goes back to the Irish, Barnashlingan. There's a place, Monacring in South Dublin, near Dalkey, is it? Monacring. There are places in South Kildare, is it King A or something like that? But basically this INN becoming ING seems to have happened in South Ireland, as far west as a line from Clonakilty to Kilgarvan in County Kerry, and then a line up along the Kerry border and up into Clare. So everywhere east of that NN line, slender NN line, turned NN into NG. You'll be interested to know. But again, this word in the manuscript was written as caring, which shows that the EITHI had the TH had disappeared, giving us a long A, and that the slender strong N had become NG, which is where we get the caring from. Okay, the vointo, same thing, same word. The vointo, or sorry, the voin, the choidhche. And again, notice that the ID, not quidge, but choidhche. Choidhche is probably was in Leinster with this pure palatal yeah, even though in Munster nowadays it tends to become an alveolar, either an alveolar palatal or a palatal alveolar. But pure palatal in Leinster would seem choidhche. Aslog, out of the hollow of your groin, aslog the vlein. This as word historically was the word a, and is related to the Latin ex, meaning out of ex. But what has happened in all dialects except Cape Clear and southeast Cork is that the third person singular masculine has taken over as the normal form of the word as. But the correct form, the historical form, is o, agus, and alu. So out of a donkey. a hustle is the historical form, even though most dialects nowadays say hustle. So here again we have what we expect in this area, us. Agus the vúil amach. Now this really should be spelt as two separate words. Into the field. And just to point out in case people have never thought about it before, in Old Irish there was a difference between accusative and dative. So accusative implied motion, whereas dative or tábhairteach locative implies location. So for example, what's now written as one word, isteach implies movement into the house in words, whereas istig implies position or location in the house. In the same way, amach applies out, motion to the field, MAGH, mach to the field, whereas amwe, as we'd say, well, amo in Munster, but implies motion to the field, amwe, in this dialect, amwe. But here we have amach. But historically, this was made up of so, tach. Tach was a neuter S stem, and this was the old neuter article. It's a tach. Right, I won't go on to that. But really, it should be written as two separate words. Again, with the slender R, we'd expect it, if it were ossuary style, to be ej, and if not, ed. Feirrde. Going back to the idea of saying that D and DH, G and GH, that Old Irish was preserved as the sound rather than a before these consonants. This may have been pronounced as feirrde, or at least feirrde, rather than fag, as it would be in Kerry. Like the word sha, people nowadays, really means it is thus. Or actually, this word, sorry, I'm a great man for the etymology. Sha, meaning yes, seems to have been in East Ireland, so basically Ossory, Line, and Meath. Sher, because the word Maria survived at least up until recently in Kilkenny English as Marshek with this velar, and the last native speakers of Louth had they maintained this DH as r at the end of words. But what's nowadays spelt as just EA, of course, is biased towards certain dialects. The historical or the older spelling was EADH, which represents, So we could reduce that even further to EAD punk. And of course, we could reduce that even further to ED with or without the dot, because we know that before, and that's the word ed, which is actually related to the English word it, if you go their cognates. So this old elf in Old Irish, elf, survived probably as in the province of Leinster, it would seem. And most strongly in east coast Leinster, it seems. So, for example, there seems to be evidence of the Tishel Ghearailt of Coil, a wood in Wicklow. They recorded it from a man in English. He said Coilug, which would seem to suggest that this EADH ending, at least in that part, what is it? Bardna Coilug? Is there a place Bardna Coilug? I don't know. That this EADH at the end of words was pronounced with this R surviving. Sorry, that's chaotic as usual, but I'm just throwing the information at you and hopefully something sticks. Okay, an hour and a half, that's a good time to stop. If you have any questions anyway, you can ask. I'm sure you've loads of questions. Why did I bother watching this video? Right, Slán Tamil.